Hi, everybody. Before I start talking about the main topics of the course, I thought I'd give you a little history of the course, how things changed, especially recently, and also give you some motivation or what my motivation is for making the changes that I made. And this relates to a term I use, which is skillful means. And what that means is this. So things you learned in 110, 220, 240 the skills you learn there may not perfectly match the skills you'll need as a software developer working at a cool startup. So things you learn in 220 may never really be used. A real software developer would never use those things. One thing that comes to mind are Java arrays. You may have learned about Java arrays, but a software developer, it's unlikely that they'll use Java arrays. They'd be more likely to use some structure like a Java list. And there are other things as well. So one thing you can think of is, well, hey, these instructors are lying to me, they're misguiding me, they're teaching me irrelevant stuff. And that may be true. But another thing they may be doing is using what I'm calling skillful means here. And what that means is that the skills of a software developer may be too kind of complex to learn immediately. So we're sort of leapfrogging, first teaching you stuff that's not entirely used by real people in the real world. And then from there, we can leap to things that are. And this course is not immune to that, kind of teaching things that wouldn't be used by software developers as a way of attaining skills that eventually will be. And let me give you an example from the previous course. So the previous course I taught in using Python in a library called Flask to develop simple servers. And we also, let me back up here, and we attach those to a database called PostgreSQL. And we practice those skills with a number of rudiments, meaning simple programming, well, maybe not so simple programming assignments. So the first thing we learned was how to develop basic web pages, these things called Flask templates. We learned how to integrate Python or connect Python with PostgreSQL. And we practice those skills with other rudiments. The one I call Where in the World is querying a database for information about cities and countries, and one called Super Search. So all these were practicing skills, and each individual skill, like learning skills about Python, certainly useful in the real world. Python's kind of a hot language. Knowing about how to integrate Flask and Postgres, all those are useful skills, but the way we used them was fairly rudimentary. No one in their right mind as a software developer would use them the way we used them here. And then later we kind of switched to how people really use this stuff into rudiments I'm calling Socket.io 1 and this Socket.io 2 version. So that was kind of the rundown of most of the course of how things worked. So we started off simple, even though that's not how software developers did it, and we moved to this more complex thing. And let me show you what that kind of resulted in, just the difficulty level. So here I have kind of an initial chart on the bottom here. Let me get some color in, and let me switch tool if I can do that quickly. Find out where I am. So here on the bottom I have these rudiments that we worked on, Flask template, connecting Postgres or the database to Flask, and some practice ones like Where in the World and Super Search. And here I got to the more difficult ones, Socket.io 1 and 2. And so if I grade how difficult students found this, I'd probably say, I don't know, this stuff was moderately easy. You may have to be learning Python as a new language, but really it wasn't all that difficult. Connecting the database server made it a little harder. Super Search, not that hard, so we're not dealing with kind of difficulty thing. But here when we hit the Socket.io stuff, all of a sudden the difficulty level went kind of up and looked like that sort of. So it got very difficult. There was a point in the course where things got way difficult. And just as a gauge for that, so about 95% of students completed Super Search, this last of these four basic rudiments. The first Socket.io one, about 70% of people complete, and the second one, 50%. Of the people who completed this, they said, oh, it's really not a big deal. I understand that it's kind of cool technology. It's not that hard. I attained it. It doesn't look that difficult. But the ramp to get there was a lot of difficult time coding and trying to figure things out. And one reason was we kind of integrated a bunch of technology here, including something called Angular JS. So at the beginning of this summer, and we used a 1 point something, I don't know, 1.4, somewhere in there. And at the beginning of the summer, I was looking at upgrading this, keeping everything the same, the Python Flask, and then upgrading this to 2.0. And I actually did some videos related to that. But then I discovered, man, this 2.0 is a lot different than this 1.4 version. And it's really, really hard. So I decided to kind of scrap this whole course and kind of redesign it from the ground up in a way. And now it looks like this. So with this new technology we're using, so just also keep in mind that the switch from Python to JavaScript doesn't matter really too much in the difficult level, but we are switching from Python to JavaScript. And now I'd say probably the course is somewhere here, medium to medium hard to start with. So it's much more difficult at first, but this curve, as I'm drawing it, it's much smoother. So you're not at the middle of the semester not having this super difficult time with the course. So that's what I'm attempting here. So things are harder to start with than they used to be, but we're not having this huge leap of difficulty in the middle. So the reason is I'm moving some technology early on in the course, as I'll talk about shortly here. Let me just switch to another chart to give you kind of a more detailed look at that. So here's that chart again, but this time, so let's say since I'm here, I'm going to use this blue color for JavaScript Node.js. So I'm dividing up things you need to learn for this course. And JavaScript, not that big a deal. Node's a little harder. I kind of lumped them together just so I don't have to do so many lines. But I'd say that's kind of easy to medium, so that doesn't change too much, maybe a little. Maybe I should have drawn it not so straight. The database PostgreSQL stuff, let me make that color a purplish color, so that's purple. And that's a little harder as we grow. I mean, that's kind of the main point of the course. And that looks like that, so not that difficult. HTML, CSS, yes, you have to learn that stuff. And let me get that color in. That's the green color. And I'd say that's not that hard. It's just yet another thing to learn. Actually, it's pretty easy, but and it doesn't get much harder as things go on. Server technology, I'm just kind of lumping all the learning the different tools and stuff there. In order to add it, let me get it that wonky color. And that's also fairly, there are little glitches people have. So I'll draw this in kind of a glitchy line, but again, not that hard. And finally, this React piece, I'm going to put that in red, because that initially actually is a fairly hard piece of technology. It gets easier as the time goes on. So really, we're getting this React is a fairly difficult. So any one of these technologies is not that hard. So what makes the course difficult, and let me switch tools again, are sort of two things. The one is that React is hard. I don't know why. So, but the other thing is there's lots of new stuff, let me just say new stuff, to learn. That's the big thing. So learning JavaScript, not that big of a deal. Learning database stuff, harder, but not that big of a deal. All this stuff, not except for React, is a bit more challenging, not that hard. The hard part is there's so much to put together to get something up and running that it's kind of overwhelming at first. Overwhelming is probably a poor choice of words, but that's kind of the difficulty curve I wanted to mention here. So the difficulty in this initial chart, let me get back to that. This part right here, that, as I mentioned, was related to Angular and also related to learning some other new ways of doing stuff. One was this MVC. So really there was a big jump there because of a bunch of new things added. Now I'm moving this MVC technology, which I'll talk about next in the next video or so, up front. So that's one other level of difficulty here, is just learning stuff the right way, the way people are doing it in the real world up front, rather than kind of delaying that to this inflection point of making things really hard. So I just wanted to kind of outline what our plan is, why things may at first seem hard, and let me just bump to this other chart to kind of wind up. And some of these things are fairly independent. I should have drawn this a little differently here. So we can be working on JavaScript Node.js, this here, fairly independently. So this line here, which I'm now drawing in red, and React, they can be two separate learning things we're working on, and only later are we going to be combining them into one system. So we can do some rudiments in Node.js. Some programming assignments are just strictly React, only one. And then at some later point, we're going to combine them. So a lot of this we're learning kind of little, and also with Postgres and database stuff, we're learning that from day one, kind of independently of knowing JavaScript. JavaScript's not completely independently, but of learning React. And then at some later point in the course, as weeks progress, we're starting to combine all these things. So it's like we're learning things individually, like there's mini courses within this course. And I'm hoping this method will kind of get us up to speed, get us learning what full stack developers, meaning front end and back end people who are good at multiple skills, use in the field. So next one, I'll be talking about this model view controller. I'm hoping this was a little helpful in explaining why the course is designed the way it is. Thanks.